tonight for the last of our series as a celebration of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Prize. I'm Katie Smith. I'm with the Piedmont Health Foundation, and I'm so proud to be a part of this team that has brought you all here tonight, and we're glad that you're with us. Briefly, I want to recap where we've been and talk a little bit about what we want to do tonight. We are here to harness the collective power of leaders, partners, and community members, which is part of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Culture of Health Prize. And we want to do it by lifting up great examples of people who are doing work right now to bring new voices, to change things in our community. And we have some great examples of that tonight. At our first event on May 6th, we heard from Stacy Mills at Mountain View Baptist Church. We heard from Jamie Fivecoat, Jose Daniel Rodriguez, and David Taylor about what first got them interested in changing our community and the path that they've been on. And then we got a little deeper into things by hearing from Ferris Steele Johnson on some practical tips for mobilizing community. We heard stories from folks like Caroline Caldwell, Adrian Atkinson, Lauren Stevens, Sebastian Villasis, and Michael Brown about environmental justice, DACA, LGBTQI issues, and so much more. And hopefully you all felt excited and ready to do some work. And so what we want to talk about tonight are some of those tools to do the work, to engage community, to build power, and to change things for the better for all people in Greenville County and create a culture of health. So I'm so glad that you're with us along with all of our guests. And for our first speaker, I'd like to turn it back over to Helen to introduce Sloan Joseph to us. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I have the pleasure of being able to introduce Sloan Joseph. And I'll go ahead and give y'all some information about Sloan. For the past 18 years, Sloan Joseph has served as an instructional leader, serving 4 to 12 in the area of school and classroom culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, engagement, and technology. She has a Bachelor of Science in Administration, SC State University, and a Master of Arts in School Administration from Gardner Webb University. Her teaching career began as a business education teacher with Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools in She has also served as a new mentor, Title I facilitator. Sloan currently serves as an instructional technology coach at Greer Middle School and next year the instructional coach at Hughes Academy of Science. Oh, sorry, just realized my audio is a little choppy. Outside of her work with Greenville County Schools, Sloan is a member of the SCAFCD Emerging Leader Class of 2020, a member of the Teach Better Team Speakers Network, co-organizer for EdCamp Greenville, and co-creator of #BreatheEDU, a platform assisting school and district leaders with creative, inclusive, and equitable learning environments. Sloan is also the host of Greater Is in Me, a podcast centered around her life as a wife, a mother, and educator. The purpose of the podcast is to inform, inspire, and influence listeners to fulfill the greatness that exists within. Greater Is in Me is available on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and Spotify. You can also connect with P. Sloan Joseph on Instagram at greaterisinme_, or on Twitter at P. Sloan Joseph. And I'm really happy to be able to present Sloan and have her talk to y'all for a little bit. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I know that you've had a long day, but I hope that what I have to say for the next few minutes will inform, inspire, and influence you to fulfill the greatness that we all have within us. And so I want to start by thanking Jessica for inviting me to spend some time and share some space with you this afternoon or this evening. And what I want to talk about is the importance of you taking care of yourself so that you can be your best to help take care of our community. because I believe, and I say this all the time on my podcast, you cannot give what you don't have. You can only give what you have. And the only way that we can move from good to better to best is if we're giving our best self to other people, but we have to take the best care of ourselves so that we can take the best care and advocate appropriately for those in our community who have situations that are not the best. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to talk to you very quickly about one of the ways that I practice self-care. But before we get started, if you don't mind, in the chat, I'd like for you to just take about 30 seconds and share with the group, if you would like to, just share one or two ways that you categorize self-care. How do you take care of yourself? When you start thinking about self-care, what are some things, what are some activities, who are some people, what would that look like in your life? So let's take about 30 seconds to engage in the chat. Getting hands dirty in the garden, playing cards, sleeping, oh yes, running, bubble baths, exercise, talking with close friends, prayer and meditation, listening to podcasts. Well, listen to my podcast, Greater is in Me. Little selfish plug. I did it. Book clubs. Greater is in Me has a book club as well. Another plug. If you don't love yourself, who's gonna love you? You know, if you don't support yourself, who will? Right? Hanging out with friends, nails. Yes, I need to get my nails done. Phone off. That's a good one. Healthy diet, positive people. Thank you for sharing with me. And so you'll see there are a variety of things that are there. And some of those things cost money and some of them are free. And so the strategy that I'm going to talk to you about is, as a teacher, you know, there are lots of things I'd like to do, but I can't afford to do, right? And sometimes when I splurge, the self-care, then I have guilt about the self-care because I spent money trying to take care of myself to make myself feel good. And now I have to stock my bank account, right? And I'm eating sandwiches and I'm, eating cereal and things like that. And then that's stressing me out, which is the opposite of self-care. Like, it's like this crazy cycle. But for quite some time now, I have been journaling, and that has transitioned over the years. And so I have several different strategies. It started off as like, let me just unload, dear diary, this is what happens today. And it was just like, when I go back and I read it now, it was just so negative, right? But it has evolved because I started to get bored with that. And just like anything, those of you that talked about running, or if you're on a diet, if you eat the same foods every day, you start to get tired of that. If you run the same path every day, you start to get tired of that. And so what I started to do is learn different ways to journal. And I'm going to share one of those strategies with you. And then if you and your organization would like for me to share other strategies, you can contact me. And I would love to do a journaling strategy workshop with you. And then you can figure out which ones work best for you. So let me share my screen. All right. And so the strategy that I'm going to share with you is called the GLAD strategy. And it just takes the letters in the word GLAD, and it allows you to create a space where you are reflective of the things that you are accomplishing and that you are doing well in your life, because we oftentimes do not give ourselves enough credit for the things that we do. And we harp on those things that are missing or that we're doing wrong. And to me, that's the opposite of self-care. We need to affirm ourselves just like we want other people to affirm us that are in our lives. And so some of what I'm going to talk to you about is, in these strategies, it allows you to reflect, which is very important for emotional intelligence, setting goals, reflecting on events, emotions that you may feel. And as I'm talking about this, I want you to understand it doesn't matter how often you write. Don't get caught up in, oh, I need to write every day or whatever. However you do it, once a month, once a week, once a day. If you write it out in a journal, or if you type it up or put it in your phone on your notes app, just as long as you are getting it out there, I think that's what's most important. So my little Post-it note on this slide says, caring for yourself is not selfish. And sometimes you'll have people in your life that will make it seem like when you're doing things for yourself that you're being selfish, but it actually is not that way. And so again, certain things, that equipment or supplies that I have, I love journals, I love flare pens, I love mechanical pencils and highlighters and colored pencils, just all kinds of things. So those are some things that you may need. So this first one for G is, when you're writing, you're focused on what you're grateful for. And that could be a person, place, or thing. And so if you would like to, in the chat, and I can't read it now, but I will read it once we're finished. What is something that you're grateful for? Who is someone? There's a place, there's a thing. What is something that you are grateful for? So if you'll take about 15, 20 seconds to share, if you would like. What are you grateful for? Maybe I can see, I don't know, can I see? I love it. Health, family, natural resources. Very good. And so that's the first part of the GLAD strategy. The next part is, what is one thing you learned today? We do so much and we don't sit back and think about, like, I learned something new. It may be a concept, it may be something that you learned about yourself, something that you learned about your history, or something that you learned about the community that you are serving. So what is something that you learned today? And my little Post-it note says, do your best to be your best. That's what I tell all my students every day. Do your best to be your best. Don't compete with anyone else. So if you'd like to share, what is something that you learned today or that you've learned this week?
Sloan, should we be sharing in the chat again? I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yes, sharing in the chat. I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. Interesting. How to grow tomatoes, or at least to have a tomato on the vine, right? Baby steps, start, give yourself credit for that. How to smoke cheese, okay. How to love people and still set boundaries. That's so important. And I have an episode about that. That is so, so important. Very good. And thank y'all for participating. I don't like sit and gets very much. All right, the A in GLAD is for something that you've accomplished. What have you accomplished this week, this month? We are on day 20 in May. We are in the 5th month of the year. What have you accomplished this year? Pat yourself on the back, uplift yourself. So give yourself credit for something and share that in the chat if you would like. Think about the last 5 months, this month, this week, today. Give yourself some credit. Yes, getting that doctorate. I have a lot of friends that are getting their doctorates, and it is just work. Give yourself credit. Saving instead of shopping. Hiked 17 miles on Sunday. That's amazing. I'm glad that you're here. If I would have done that on Sunday, I would still be tired. And I don't know that I would be here with y'all. Or as my mom would say, I'd be there, but with one eye open. Something like that, Got your yard ready for an event. All right. I like y'all. Y'all a good group of people. All right. And we're coming to our last one. So we had grateful. We had something that we learned, something that we've accomplished. And then our last one is going to be something that you delighted in. So I want you to think about your 5 senses. And this is something that we take for granted. some of us, because of COVID, we appreciate the smell and taste a whole lot more than we used to. And I have a friend who still does not have her smell and taste. And so it makes you just think about just the small things that you could journal about and reflect about each day. So think about something that you heard, something that you saw, smelled, taste, something that you felt, something that maybe you're wearing right now that's very comfy, very cozy. But what is something that you have delighted in? And if you would share that in the chat, that would be great. Beautiful flowers. Cheesecake. Yes, Derrick, I like cheesecake too. A weighted blanket. I have one on my bed. This is my favorite. Watching my garden grow. Very good. Listening to children play. A long bath. Soaking in a long bath. Very good. And so we're doing these things. What you're seeing is we're doing these things every day, but a part of that self-care, that mindfulness, is just to stop, to just pause and be in the moment, be present. So many times we are worried about the past and the future that we're not present in the moment. And it's hard sometimes, just the hustle and bustle. But I'm hoping that this little strategy is easy, it's something that you can do. And then also something that you can share with other people that you're working with in the community. I work with young adults, and so, children, young adolescents to be specific, they're usually 11 to 14 years old. How awesome would it be if we taught our children about self-care at such a young age? Like, some of us are just coming to it, and we're trying to catch up, and we've had some stresses in our lives and experienced some trauma in our lives, that maybe if we had some strategies and people were talking to us when we were younger about mindfulness, about coping strategies, if they talked to us about self-care, we would not have gone through certain things, or we would have been able to handle certain things a particular way. And so the thing that I like about the GLAD strategy is that it's so simple that even a child can do it. And equipping our children, our youth, and our young adults to stop and to reflect and to think about those things that they are grateful for, those things that they have learned, the things that they've accomplished, and the things that they delighted in, so that they are full on the inside, so that they can fill the buckets of others in their families and in their communities. I thank you for this time today, the short time that we had together. I hope that I will have opportunities in the future to work with you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and sharing space with me today. And at the end of my podcast, I always say, take time every day to reflect and reaffirm yourself by saying, greater is in me. Y'all have a good afternoon.
So thank you, Sloan. Yeah, I'm very biased because I adore Sloan and she knows it. And there are times where like Sloan and I will just be chit-chatting and she'll say something and I'm like, girl, I need to get a pen. Hold on, I got to write that down. I got to tweet it. I got to put it on a sticky note. And I mean, I think about self-care a lot. I talk to people about self-care. And even for me, thinking about journaling in this way, and when you talked about it doesn't have to be every day, like the story that I believed is that if you didn't journal multiple times a week, that you shouldn't do it. And so that was really encouraging to me. And writing it down and thinking about it this way, like it's so practical that it feels like, to your point, anybody can do it. And I mean, I always talk about gratitude and that if Oprah does it and she finds it valuable, everybody should. So I so appreciate you, Sloan. Thank you for sharing with us. And also just thank you for what you do. Like, you are impacting the lives of young people every day. And so I appreciate you spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you. I love you too.
I can't wait so I can hug you in person. So I am really excited to host the next little portion of our event, which will be a panel. And I'm going to take a step back and introduce myself, because I realize y'all don't necessarily know who I am. So my name is Jessica Sharp. I'm on the little planning committee that has put these series of events together. And I am the founder and CEO of a company called Sharp Brain Consulting. And I volunteer at various organizations in the community. And I'm really excited about these specific events and the purpose of them and the sorts of conversations that we've been having. I have pages of notes from our previous events, and I'm really excited about this one as kind of our final event of this particular series. So we're going to have a panel discussion that's really focused on, how do we kind of take what are the practical skills that we need in order to engage with the community. And so I'm going to first introduce our panelists, and I'm, if you are, like most probably humans at this point, you've been on like 1,000,001 Zoom events, and you've probably been to 1,000,000 events like this. And there are lots of different ways people introduce people, right? Like we all have bios, and sometimes you read the full one, sometimes you didn't. But as I was going through these, through the bios for our speakers, I was like, I got to read these whole bios because they're so good. And so it will feel like, goodness, Jessica's talking a lot, but like these bios are really good. And the folks that we have on this panel, like, I want you to know all about them. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to read their bios, and then I'm going to ask them all a question to kind of get us started. But know that I'll be asking questions. But if you've got a question for the panel, pop it in the chat and I'll kind of infuse it in. So the first panelist that I'll introduce is Lawson Wetley. Lawson is a longtime Greenvillian and an attorney with a practice area focused on corporate, transactional, and securities law. She received her JD from Columbia University School of Law and worked at Gibson Dunn in New York City before moving to Greenville and practicing with the Weish Law Firm for a number of years. She currently practices with the Entrepreneurs Law Group. As a volunteer, Lawson is committed to helping people connect to their own power as voters and as members of our civic body. Among Lawson's current volunteer roles are serving as co-president of the League of Women Voters in Greenville County, as the voter registration chair of the Greenville branch of the NAACP, and as a member of the board of the Greenville County Redevelopment Authority and of the Upstate Mediation Center. So that's Lawson. Next up, we've got Vanessa Rodriguez. Vanessa is a Puerto Rican and a proud, and I'm gonna try really hard, words matter, Ponceña. I'm seeing a shaking of the head, all right. From Ponce, south of the island, daughter of Yoli and Raul, Mary Mar's sister, Angel's wife, and Lorenzo's mother. She is a brave woman. God is at the center of her life, and she is a full-time optimist and passionate communicator. Communications and public relations consultant for over 20 years, Vanessa saw strategic communications process as a tool to build and maintain mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. She has experience working with governmental agencies, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. Vanessa was the director of the communications office of the Women Advocate of the Government of Puerto Rico for 8 years, and later 12 years with as a public relations consultant for the autonomous municipality of Caguas. Okay, seeing the shaking of the head again, we're good. After Hurricane Maria passed through Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017, challenges of all kinds arose. And for her, they were no exceptions. She decided to undertake and stay in Puerto Rico and contribute to her homeland. And why not launch herself in the blogs? And so her blog name is, and I'm gonna spell it out because it's on Instagram and Facebook, so you can type it out as you go. It's at VDESCALZA. After a year of facing the challenges of the island, in January of 2019, Vanessa and her family moved to South Carolina. And in March of last year, Vanessa started to work as a community action coordinator for the Hispanic Alliance and Live Well Greenville, which is one of the partners putting this event on, in the Build Trust and Build Health project. So welcome, Vanessa. Derrick Quarles is our next speaker. Growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, with his mother, father, and 5 brothers, Derrick L. Quarles, aka the political whiz, was curious about the world around him and the people in it. Despite his structured, happy upbringing, he began having disciplinary issues at school. At the tender age of 13, Derrick entered the juvenile justice system and was labeled, quote, a menace to society by a family court judge. Because of his actions, he was sentenced to serve 8 months in that juvenile detention center. With a renewed passion for helping others and a determination to prove the family court judge wrong, he graduated from high school, began working, and sought opportunities to be engaged in the community. In 2008, Derrick joined his local NAACP chapter and helped organize a protest reprimanding gangs, drugs, and violence in a Greenville neighborhood that was widely known for crime, poverty, food insecurity, and dilapidation. While continuing to work in the community, he enrolled in Claflin University in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science and criminal justice. With a growing number of police brutality cases against children and people of color in 2012, Derrick knew that he couldn't sit idly by. Subsequently, in 2015, he was invited to the White House and had the opportunity to meet then Vice President Joe Biden and the first Black female Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, to discuss criminal justice reform and to provide recommendations on 21st century policing. Continuing as a community organizer and activist, Derrick was employed by the South Carolina Senate and provided consulting services to the South Carolina Legislative Black Caucus. As the number of police brutality killings continued to rise in major cities and in South Carolina, Derrick established the upstate chapter of Black Lives Matter. Within BLM, he helped facilitate the outside arrest of Sergeant Jonathan Pentland's home, the U.S. Army drill sergeant who bullied a Black young man, telling him that he didn't belong in their neighborhood. He is a member of the Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated and has served on numerous committees and has received a number of awards and recognition. Additionally, he earned his Master's of Public Administration degree from Grand Canyon University and has continued his studies at Indiana University and the University of Michigan. He is due to complete his PhD in higher education administration at Jackson State in July of this year. Outside of work and accomplishing his educational goals, Derrick cherishes spending time with his family and friends, growing his relationship with God, and inspiring his growing number of followers on social media. And our last speaker for the day for our panel is Monse Ramirez Perez. Monse Ramirez Perez is a queer 21-year-old Mexican immigrant. She was first brought to the US at the age of 5. In 2012, Monse was a recipient of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. She calls Asheville and the mountains of Western North Carolina her home, and one of Monse's passions is fighting for language justice by building bridges among different communities. Through outreach, she uses our shared experience with language to connect communities throughout Western North Carolina. Monse is a social justice Spanish-English interpreter, a poet, and a musician. Monse believes in the importance, altars, and the magic of healing in the community. She is a Pisces sun, Virgo moon, and Cancer ascending. Monse hopes to empower undocumented youth to come out of the shadows and create change in their communities. So I know, y'all, that took a little minute, but as I was going through these bios and preparing for this, I just felt like, I just want to read these whole bios and I want everyone to know all about them. So I'm really excited to start talking to our panelists and hear from somebody other than me. So I know that I've, read the bios and we know who y'all are, right? But I'd love to hear from each of you. And I want to start this conversation out. The whole point of all of these events is how do we catalyze folks in the community who say, there's something happening that I'm not happy about, and there's something that I don't like, and I want to get me and my neighbors and my friends, we're going to make some change, right? So with that in mind, what is your vision for your community? Most of us live in Greenville, Monse, you don't, but so for your community. But I'd love to just hear from each of you and no one in particular, but if you could just, tell us, what do you see as an ideal community in Greenville and in Asheville? And any of you who wants to start can go ahead. And the teacher in me is happy to call on you if you want. I see Derrick is unmuted. Derrick goes first.
I'll be very brief. So for me, an ideal community looks like, and people always say, like, I don't see color, I don't see black and white, and that's just not true. Like, how do you not see color? If you don't see color, that's a problem. And so I think people should like admit, because that's the first step is you got to see color. Because if you don't see color, then you don't see the issues. But seeing color and then recognizing that there are disparities and that there are issues simply based on skin color, and then not being ashamed or shy when talking about, like, being intense about those conversations. One of the things I pride myself in is having those very hard conversations with like the most randomest people about like color, race, racism. In fact, I had a conversation with a prominent attorney about 6 weeks ago in Colombia at Halls, and he just texted me like 2 hours ago and asked me, could we go for drinks tomorrow night? And so it was all from a random conversation about like race and racism. And so I think that for me, we can't have an ideal community if we don't first address like the smallest, well, it's not really small, but like the most simple issues, and that's race and race disparities and all the stuff that goes along with it.
I'll jump in. And just to uplift, and I want to just say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel and to learn from y'all, and to have the opportunity to talk about these things. And for me, I agree. I think, there's not enough focus given on the reality and the inequities related to race and related to a whole bunch of things. And so I think one of the key first steps is identifying the nature and the distance between where we are right now and where we want to go. So just for example, and I'm not sure if all of us in this are in Greenville County, but I mean, here in Greenville County, we have one of the highest, one of the lowest rates of economic mobility anywhere. So a thing that we know is if you're born socioeconomically disadvantaged in Greenville County, you are exceptionally unlikely. There are structural elements that make it very unlikely to be able to move up and out. And of course, I imagine we all know there are racial aspects to that. And so for me, that at a minimum is step one, is just to be like, here we are, where is it that we want to go? And what is that distance? And what's a good step towards moving in that direction?
Mhm, 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 mhm.
I want to say I will do my best in English. If not, I will translate to Spanish and you guys can use the translation button. But I think that understand the reality of other people that are not like us, and to open your heart and your eyes to see that difference can many times unify our message, our work, and what we can do to support other groups that are in need. I think that simple things many times are very powerful to create a new reality in the community.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. This is Monse. Yeah, I don't live in Greenville, but I work with an organization who does work all across the South. I work with Southerners on New Ground, and we're a queer LGBTQ organization who fights for social justice amongst all of the South. So definitely Greenville is included. And we're definitely a base building organization, and we build relationships and communities. So I think connecting with each other, being able to really have those hard conversations around race, privilege, class, all the things, and really also finding the points of commonality. We are a multiracial organization, so we work across race, and really seeing like where can we show up for each other, where do we have the points of commonality that we can be in solidarity with each other? But I think building relationships is where we start, and specifically in the South, where we do have that long history of coming together, breaking bread, sharing meals, like really showing up for each other. I think that that is a really good starting point, like getting to know each other, and really building authentic relationships where we can say, hey, I need support here, or like, hey, show up to this thing. Like, definitely that is a way that we can begin to create change in our communities, is just by getting to know each other. So that's what I would say.
It's interesting and not surprising to me that basically you all talked about two themes. You talked about acknowledging, recognizing, identifying, calling out the issues that are happening in our community, and really in the state and then in the US, and not shying away from the hard conversations and saying, yes, racism exists. Yes, there's systemic barriers and we need to deal with them, right? So there's that piece. And then you also talked about relationships and empathy, right? Vanessa, you didn't call it that, but that's what came to mind, right? And Greenville, one of the things that I love about Greenville is that we really are a relationship town, right? Where I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I want to have coffee or talk about, right? So I'm going to go back to relationships in a second, but I want to talk about that idea of identifying and recognizing. And I know that we collectively have not done a good job of identifying and recognizing, or there's lots of things that would be fixed, and there are lots of conversations we wouldn't need to have. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. And the first kind of question and thought I have, and anybody can jump in, but why is it so hard for us to have conversations about the things that are difficult and weighty, right? We know they're important. So what are your, in your experiences doing this work and interacting with folks, what do you think are some of the barriers and challenges that are created in terms of having these conversations?
I'll be very quick again. One of the things is it's uncomfortable. Like people would rather be like in that comfort zone and not like be in situations that could potentially be conflict. And so, but I think that if we're going to um, if we're gonna make progress, then we gotta be uncomfortable. It's gotta be hard. It's gotta be like yucky, sticky, nasty, and it's gotta be real.
Mhm.
I completely agree. And I would add that there is a very powerful counter narrative that tries to sell a very different story, right? So to me, one of the founding myths is that what we live in is fundamentally a merit-based society. And the reason why the hierarchies are what the hierarchies are is because that's just merit playing out. And it is obvious to me that is the opposite of the truth. And at the same time, it is clear to me that is, when we're talking, when challenges to power and redistribution of resources is on the table, there are a whole lot of people and powers that are heavily invested in that not changing. And that false narrative that this is all a merit-based system serves to prop that up and make people feel like it's good to keep things the way they are.
Mhm.
Jessica, quisiera añadir que
Jessica, I also want to add that the reality is that sometimes these groups that we don't recognize are not represented in places where these situations are occurring. Is where are these resources being distributed? And when there's not a voice that represents you, when your priorities is looking for food, looking for housing, and if you're not in those spaces where the differences are being made at a political level that's public to say that this is a right, if we don't find somebody that represents us, I think that's very difficult for us. And then it's hard to move ahead to see that we have these real population who is at a disadvantage.
Sí, exactamente. Yo diría, like, just to
Yes, exactly. I would say
que, que sí, en realidad muchas veces no sabemos.
yes, that we don't know, and our community is not up to date as to what's going on, the current events, and that we're new to the community and we don't know what's going on. Or sometimes the resources just aren't there, like interpretation, translation, to bring these communities to the table so we can have those conversations, so that we are present. And one more thing that I would say in terms of obstacles and things that don't let us have these conversations is that we are not taught how to have these conversations. As somebody was saying earlier, that's how it is, and that's how you have to do certain things, this and that, to be part of that community. And there are other ways to think. So then, as they were saying, these are the ways we have to do.
But yeah, like we don't often aren't like taught how to have these difficult conversations. We're not taught to like challenge. We're always taught to assimilate and follow this status quo, to the point where we become robots almost, or like we don't have, or we don't feel like we have the right to go against people in power.
Y'all, you all are preaching a whole sermon tonight, and I just, I mean, I have so many thoughts in my head, and the first thought I have is that I really appreciate that, Vanessa and Monty, that you all shifted and spoke in Spanish, because from the beginning of this, it was really important to us that we incorporated language justice and that this event was accessible. And as we were planning and having conversations, one of the things I said something about like this, how do you kind of create change, engage in the community, engage in activism essentially, when there's a language barrier, right? And kind of the response, the answer is like, well, you can't, right? Because we don't have an infrastructure that allows for folks to speak more than one language, even though we know that there are plenty of people in Greenville who do not speak English, right? And we essentially are penalizing folks who come here and who don't speak English. And so I wanted to first say that I really appreciate it. And I mean, you all really, I mean, like very quickly hit at like what I feel like is one of the core fundamental challenges in terms of making change, right? That systems and organizations, and particularly things like education system, the criminal justice system, like the local government system, they aren't designed to change, and they aren't designed to move quickly, right? And the thing that you all talked about is that when we start pushing up against the power structure, it pushes back very hard. I mean, and Derrick can talk about it had the power structure pushed it up against him several times, right, as he was doing his work. And I think that, I've got now also multiple questions, right? But the thing that I want us to think about and start talking about is, like, what are we supposed to do if we know that we deserve a better community and that it isn't functioning well for everyone, right? Lawson talked about economic mobility. If you are born poor in Greenville, your life is really hard, right? I mean, if you're poor, if you're Black, by golly, if you're poor and Black, right? I mean, there are all of these, if you don't speak English, if you have a physical disability, right? The systems aren't made for you. But if we know that we deserve a better community, but we also know that the power system is going to push back on us, how do we engage in what we call community power building, where we get folks together and then we collectively push back? Like, how do we do that when we know the power system is going to push back? I also know that I've asked a question that's not easy. And I think if it was easy, we wouldn't have to have this event.
Can you ask one more time, just the question part?
Yeah. how do we create change when we know the power structures will push back and try to alienate us?
Puedo empezar yo, y yo diría que para mí,
I can start. I would say that for me, for all of my existence, I've had to push to be able to have space. And our communities are not new. We've been pushing and trying to change. And we've always had our ancestors that have had to struggle to get to this point where we are now. And so I would say that within our communities, to push and make this change is not something new for us. It's something that we've been struggling with. And I would say that the whole system that has been created is not been created to benefit people of color or Black people. It's been created so that we stay down. And so we've said that we've always been struggling. And to struggle against these systems is like bringing along this legacy of our ancestors and maintaining and keeping ourselves firm in what they've done to be able to continue doing it. And so I would say struggling against the state and the system to create change is our birthright. I don't know how to say it in Spanish, but it's our birthright. I would like to add something, that there's a tool that I understand to be very important with education. If our community, if our young people, like for instance, I have a 15-year-old that's growing up, and it's important that he maintains his Spanish, because at some point he's going to have a level of education. He's going to come into spaces that are traditionally we are not represented. It's a person who has lived through what we've lived through, and we've not had the opportunities because those resources are lacking, to be able to struggle with a commitment and solidarity to be able to keep bringing in opportunities to our community. And so education is extremely important for our community, and to help them that they understand that they can make decisions and understand the reality that maybe this community doesn't represent our community and the lives of everyone.
So I think I was asked to be on this panel because of my connection to civic engagement efforts. And so I just want to touch on that for a second, because I think it's a great example of one thing that's not the only thing or necessarily the most important thing, but it's a thing. And when I think of civic engagement, it means both voting and also connecting with our elected officials after they get voted into office to connect with them. And we know from the history of voting in the United States that it has always been a fight, right? Always, from the beginning. In the beginning, only white men who owned property were allowed to vote. And for everybody else, it was a fight that took decades, that took centuries. So that's the history of voting. And the thing that I do think, because there's so many important ways to make change, and again, voting and engagement is not the only way, but it kind of is the cornerstone, and it's a thing to focus on. A friend of mine has a saying that I think of a lot, and it's, we all carry our own grain of sand, right? All of us carry our one little thing and we do it. And together we can make a beach, together we can make a mountain, but that's by carrying that little grain of sand one by one. And to me, that's true for us as individual people. And that's exactly what our vote is too. It's one little grain of sand that groups together to make something monumental.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what's been said, and I would just add to that, having worked for an elected official, not only must you connect with your elected representatives, you've got to like it's way deeper than that. Like you've got to like almost like be in their pockets. Not so much, and I don't mean like in the negative context, but I mean like you got to be able to call them and say, hey, look, so and so is happening in my community, and I need you to address it as my elected representative. And it can't be, oh, I'll look into it or I'll get somebody to know. It's like you have to hold them accountable, and so it's about accountability. Um, when we look at law enforcement, one of the things they pride themselves in is being community focused. And in my experience, that's not true, especially in Greenville. And as much as we we like to pretend like, I mean, they're community focused in certain areas, but not in areas where they should be community focused. And so it's also about being accountable and holding folks accountable. Law enforcement, they hold us accountable, and so I think we also have the duty to hold them accountable. And so, in the same way, elected officials, it's all about accountability because how do we, uh, if they push, you push back, and if they push, you just keep pushing, and eventually somebody will get pushing, but don't let it be you, unless you've got to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Sally put a question in the chat that I actually was kind of thinking about asking. So Derrick, we're going to put you on the spot a little bit, which I know you're comfortable with, but can you tell us a little bit more about what holding our elected officials accountable, what does that look like practically?
So it's several different methods. One of the things is just pick up the phone and calling them, and you may not always get the elected person, but getting persons like the city manager who's appointed by elected people, who will pick up the phone and talk to you, or the deputy city manager, or maybe a staffer in the elected official's office, building that relationship, and then just telling them like I voted for you or I support you or whatever it is, and making them understand, as Lawson just mentioned about your one vote, like your one vote does count, especially in local elections, and so reminding them of that and reminding them also that you have the influence and the ability to get other people to support other candidates. An example of that is back in 2016, there was a sheriff race in Greenville, and at the time we had Sheriff Steve Loftus, who had been the sheriff for a long time, and it's almost impossible to have it's impossible at this point to have a Democrat elect a sheriff in Greenville, and so what we decided to do as folks who don't normally vote Republican is we decided to meet with all of the candidates who were wanting to meet with us. Loftus did not want to meet with us, and so we told him that we had looked at the numbers, we studied the last 4 elections, and we knew how many votes we needed to make an impact to make him lose. And he laughed at us literally, and he lost his election because we voted Republican that year. And so that's another thing is being intentional about your vote and and that's why he lost, in case people didn't know that. And another thing is with law enforcement, like example of that is not just elected folks, but also people again who are sworn to uphold and protect and serve. So in Malden, you can Google this, but a Malden police officer was terminated last week, and you can just Google Malden police officer terminated. He was terminated from the school district because he was a school resource officer, and he was terminated from the police department last week because in 2019 he decided to use a racial slur, and he had been at the school in Malden since 2007, and people said, oh, he was a cool officer, he was nice, he was this, he was that, and I believe that. But at the same time, you can't just like throw racial slurs around, because if you do it, then you'll have the whole school calling people out of their names. And so we put pressure on Malden. They didn't want to terminate him, but we got attorneys involved because it was that serious to us. And so eventually they terminated him, but that's another, and again, that was from 2019, and it just happened last week. And so sometimes you got to keep pushing until you get those results. But that's just a few examples of how you hold folks accountable.
And thank you for sharing that specificity, because I think that it's helpful to know what this can practically look like, because sometimes we don't know what that means. Like, what does it mean to engage your elected official, right? And I think the really good thing about living in a world where there's so much technology is that things are more accessible now in a few ways. You know, one, you can Google and figure out, one, who is your elected official and how to get in touch with them. And you can call them, you can email them, you know, and we're a small enough place. You might, you know, post COVID, which really kind of now, you might see them in the grocery store, right? But they work for us, right? You know, and I appreciate, Derrick, that you talked about also the work you do in the criminal justice space around policing. And I work with the city of Malden, so Derrick and I have had some conversations about this. But I mean, it's important to push back and to say, this is important. And I want to make sure that I feel safe in my community and that I feel heard, right? As citizens, you know, that's a basic right that we all should be able to expect. And, you know, one of the questions that I was thinking about earlier that I think is a really good time to ask now is, when you all think about, you know, either kind of the specific work that you do. So, you know, for Lawson, it's voting, you know, for Derrick, it's really, you know, community activism. You know, if somebody came up to you and said, okay, so fine, I'll get engaged in this work. I went to this event. I'm all riled up. Let's do it. Let's do something. You know, what would you say to them? What's their grain of sand, right? So how do we push this work forward? What do you need from us to engage in community power building work?
Sometimes we just need people. We just need like physical bodies, like present. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's more than enough, especially when, you know, because I spend a lot of time like meeting with the mayor, meeting with the city manager, meeting with elected officials. And so, and I've seen it from both sides, as a staff person and as an activist. I've seen it from both sides. And so, as a staffer, if I see one or two people coming to speak to, you know, the senator about an issue, like, it may not be like priority, but if you got 25 or 30 people saying, hey, we got an issue we want to talk about, that's when you'll see the senator running down the hall saying, let me go and meet with these people. And so sometimes just being in the room, not saying anything. And then for white people, especially, a lot of times, particularly in Greenville, a lot of times when we go to these meetings, and even if it's 25, let's just say it's 25 people of color in the room, we probably still won't be heard because we don't have that white representation. And so I can tell you about at least 10 different times when we've had only like people of color in the room, and we were like overheard but not really heard. And then we had that same meeting and we invited white people into the room, and then it was a totally different conversation, and we started getting things started happening. And so so we need like allies. We need people, again, in those spaces, in those rooms, saying, hey, I support this, I believe in this, we're all a community, let's do this work.
I want to make a quick comment, and going back to what you said about being in the room and showing up is consistency. Human beings, we don't like change. We don't like to change the status quo because of the uncertainty that it brings to the whole situation. A lot of times I think about the Vietnam War. It went on for so long because we wanted to save face. We didn't want to admit that we were wrong. So I think consistency, and going back to what Vanessa said about education, educating not just the individuals in our community, but those individuals that are empowered to make those decisions and these decisions. And it takes time, you know. A lot of struggles take a lot of time, but little by little, you know, we make changes that way. So I work with Prisma Health, and the message, the consistency that we bring is, listen, we need to hire more bilingual individuals. We need to have more individuals that are providing the care that look like us, because that's what's going to build trust with those individuals that are alienated, and you know, that's going to improve our health. So I just wanted to mention that.
I agree with all that. And Jessica, to get back to just your question, as I heard it, about what advice to give people who want to jump in and do something, I have two pieces. And the first is to encourage people to focus, because I think it's very easy. I know for me, I'm just going to talk about this past state South Carolina legislative session and how I felt like my head was about to explode off of my body the entire time. Like, you're bringing back a firing squad? You're doing what? Like, it's so easy to just whirl around like a dervish in my own outrage about and there's so many things to be outraged about, and it can be exhausting. And so the thing that I would encourage people is we can't do it all. It's that one little grain of sand. Pick something and then give yourself grace that you can't do everything. So pick a topic, whatever it is. So number one, focus is what I really encourage everybody to do. And the second thing is, once you've got your focus, kind of recognize your own power and the resources available to you. So for example, chances are whatever you're interested in, there's probably people who already are working on that. Find them, find them and join them. I mean, to Derrick's point, you need bodies. That's right. Like, find the group that's doing that and then show up, and as Sebastian said, do it consistently. And again, recognize your own power. I feel like a lot of times people don't think of themselves as working within whatever their existing networks already are. But whatever existing networks you have, that's the core of your power. Use it. Whatever you want to make happen, talk to your friends, talk to your family, utilize the networks you're already embedded in. So that's my advice.
Yo te invito a aceptar la diversidad.
I invite you to accept diversity, and I invite you into solidarity, and that I invite you, if you're in a position of privilege, that you look for resources for people who don't have those.
Jessica, I just wanted to jump in and piggyback on what Vanessa just said. We did that book study last summer, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? So if you've never read that book, please read it. And that book, as much as I'm an equity advocate and a teacher, educator, what it helped me to realize, Vanessa, what you were talking about is privilege. And oftentimes we think about privilege as in race and skin color. But privilege is also socioeconomic. So you could be a person of color who has financial means, and you can use your privilege. She also mentioned in the book the fact that the default in this country is Christian. The default is marriage. The default is being male. The default is being educated. If you are in any of those categories, you are privileged. And so in whatever way you can use your privilege, then do that. So although there's not a privilege on me because of the color of my skin, the fact that I can effectively articulate, the fact that I am educated, the fact that I am an educator, the fact that I am married, the fact that I have a child, and so I can talk to people and use my son as a reference and not just come off the cuff and say what I would like to happen in theory, but here's my Black child and this is what he's going through. I use my privilege and I encourage, I like the way you said it, Vanessa, I invite you. I'm gonna have to take that. I hope, I'm asking for your permission to take that phrase, but I invite people to really sit and list, journaling, sit and list what are your privileges and how can you use those privileges to help some type of group that is high adversity or underserved.
There you go again, Sloan. You always be doing that. You always just dropping stuff. And I appreciate that you jumped in, because I think it is important for folks to understand that privilege is broad. And yes, we have to absolutely acknowledge white privilege, period. Right. So like we have to make a point to the earlier things, recognizing and acknowledging, but also, right. One of the examples I sometimes use when I talk about this is that I am able-bodied. So most buildings are made for me, right? So I don't have to worry about making sure that I can get into a building, and there's privilege in that, right? It's easier for me to navigate spaces. So as we wrap up at least our panel, there was a question that Jolly put in the chat that I think is a really good one to end on, is that, you know, a lot of us have mentioned that this work takes time, right? We've talked about power, and that power is going to push, right? So how do you keep going? How do you keep pushing in the midst of the messiness, the hardness, the 2 steps forward, 10 steps back? What allows you to keep going?
I can jump in here and I can share an example. Through our work that we do all across the South with Southerners on New Ground, we're often faced, we do a lot of advocacy work, we do a lot of campaigning around the issue of money bail and folks being kept in jail because they don't have access to pay their own bail. And a lot of the times, for the past 3 years, we held an action that we bailed Black mamas and caregivers out of jail. And a lot of the times we were like coming up against like, shit, like how do we support these people? Like how do we support these folks? And then we would hear their stories and then we're like, how can we not support these people? You know, like how, like we have the resources, we have the communities. And it was like folks in our membership who were like digging in their cars, like finding the coins, finding the dollars to like give to this organization so that we could bail these mamas out. So I think it's the stories, the connections that we make. And going back to my earlier point, like we have to do this because our ancestors got us to this point. And if we're not, then what are we doing? So I think definitely like the stories is what keeps us going. The people and the connections that we meet is what keeps us going. And our own selves and our ancestors is what keeps me going.
My real short answer is faith and hope.
For me, this gets to the point of focus and picking what you want to do. Because it's a marathon and not a sprint, it has to be sustaining and there has to be joy in it. You know, I think you have to be doing what you're doing for the right reasons, like not because you expect it to be easy or expect to be getting a cookie at the end of it, you know, but because it's intrinsically sustaining work. So pick that thing and then throw yourself at it and do what you can.
Yo quisiera decir que mantener la esperanza.
I want to say that to maintain hope, just like Derrick said, and even though we win, small steps at a time, is to be consistent so we can make a difference long term, and to never give up if we do not meet our objectives in 1 or 2 years.
I really am happy that we're ending this panel with the idea of hope. I'm reading a book right now. It's called My Time Will Come. It's by Ian Manuel, and y'all, every human, bear with me, I'm gonna get it because I'm listening to it on Audible, but I had to buy the book because it's so good. So it's by Ian Manuel, and he was incarcerated. He got sentenced to life in prison when he was 14, y'all. And in the book, he talks about hope and that's what sustained him. So y'all have got to read that book. But I want to thank each of you. I want to thank each of you certainly for the time that you have spent with us tonight. But more than that, I want to thank you for doing the work, because I know that our communities, and so, you know, I'm also thinking about Asheville, I'm thinking about Puerto Rico, I'm thinking about Mexico, right? I'm thinking about Greenville. Our communities are better because of you all. And I mean, and I know Lawson and Derrick a little bit better, certainly than Monty and Vanessa, but I can think of like practical things that are better because of you all. So I want to say thank you for that. In addition to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and being with us tonight. So I want to say thank you so much for that. So I'm really excited now that I get to introduce one more person. We are wrapping up this event as well as the series of events with a final, message, a altar call, if you will. If you've been to a Baptist church, you know what I'm talking about. So we're going to hear for just a few minutes from Tina Harris. So Tina is a native Californian with 3 grown children who are 35, 30, and 29. Tina is a senior at USC Beaufort, working towards a bachelor's degree in human services. She is a transfer student from Greenville Technical College, and her return to college is a lost dream restored once she stopped using drugs. She began her recovery journey in 2006. She has a passion for helping those affected by substance use disorder, mental illness, and homelessness, to name a few. She is a worthy change agent, advocating across many platforms. After completing an internship at Favor, she became a volunteer, then a recovery coach, and is an ambassador for Favor's Hope and Healing Hour. Tina has joined the staff of Favor as the Director of Community Outreach. Favor expands their outreach, meeting people where they are, bringing information, hope for solutions, hope for families, and hope for recovery. So Tina, take us to church.
Thank you for that introduction, Jessica, and thank you all for being here. I feel honored to present myself and my motivation for advocacy. As my bio says, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And because of my lived experiences, I have a desire to help others so that they don't go through the things that I had to go through. As a young girl, my self-esteem was so low. I was bullied. Growing up, got caught up in drug addiction, and that's a whole nother story we don't have time for. But in that addiction, I found myself pregnant and on drugs. I found myself wanting to be an intentional good mother, but I wasn't. And I did not have the power to overcome. I found myself in an abusive relationship. I found myself homeless and on the street. And getting my life back in order, which is by God's grace, today I sit before you. And what motivates me to advocate is my lived experience. My lived experience in addiction says that I got clean. And Sloan, thank you, because my privilege today, I submit to you, was that I was able to come up out of the muck and the mire. And my privilege today is that I sit before you to tell somebody about it, and I have a voice. So what motivates me to get out and affect change is that I may start doing it by myself. My voice can shine a spotlight. I think I heard Derrick saying something to this effect, shining a spotlight on a situation. But I want to scream loud enough at this situation that it provokes someone else to start shouting with me. And that's where I come from in my heart. So to get other people to come alongside of what I'm advocating for is huge. So the consistency, everything that we're talking about today, everything that I've heard, it kind of comes full circle to the point of hope, consistency, coming together. When I advocate for substance use disorder, I advocate for change, systemic change. We need funding for people to get help. We need funding for people to have a place to go, like treatment. Okay? Now, as a mother, a pregnant mother, I feel like I should be ashamed. But today I do not live in guilt and shame, because I want to stand on the tallest mountain and say, hey, for whatever reason, young mothers are getting addicted to drugs, or they get pregnant and they do not know, but they're using drugs. It happened to me. I started smoking crack cocaine. I was in a low, dark place in a marriage, but it was a dark place. And when I took that hit of crack, it took me to a place where I wanted to escape and go to over and over. And after making it through that pregnancy, I was 5 months in another pregnancy. Out of touch with my mind, out of touch with my body, out of touch with reality, you all. And so today, the stigma and shame that I real was my reality, I advocate for today for prenatal care, for care for a child after they're born from substance use disorder of their mother. It's like when I was coming up, dysfunction was swept under the carpet, an elephant in the room. It's time out for the elephant in the room. We have to address these things. We have voices speaking out about abuse. That I was able to get help with that because someone else shined the light on that. But I step up and I'm a part of advocating for, look, the advocator that does not even know they have the power to advocate. So right now I'm part of a team where we are an advocate group planning an advocacy academy. We want to help people to have a voice for themselves, the homeless. We want to show you how to advocate for yourself. Civics 101. People don't speak up because they don't have the knowledge. My Bible tells me, my people perish. God says my people perish for lack of knowledge. So if we can bring about change, getting information to people who don't know that that's their right and they have the power to do that, well, we want to do that. We want to advocate for someone to learn how to advocate. And, we can affect change that way. When on my job as community outreach director, it takes me to the soup kitchen, takes me to churches and food banks. And when I arrive, people are in survival mode. So when I come, I bring some things. I bring information, life-changing, life-saving information, hope for individuals, hope for families, hope for solutions, and hope for a way out. And as I advocate, that's my goal. That not only the knowledge is with Tina, but that everybody has the knowledge to come up out of whatever situation that you're in. I'm from Southern California, and I speak a little bit of Spanish. I'm very close to the Hispanic culture. So when I go out to do outreach, I focus on communicating to the best of my ability. When Lawson talked about that one grain, that was huge, because when we use what we have, it can take us a long way. So when I go out to do outreach and I take my communication ability in Spanish, that's me using what I have. When I'm standing on the street, helping that homeless person, giving them information on where they can get a bed, a roof over their head tonight. That's me using my voice. And when I'm in a meeting or when I show up at city council or a county council meeting to advocate for, I think everybody's familiar with the Greenville plan for 2040. Well, when I think about that, and I'm going to talk about this and then I think my time will be up. When I think about that plan and where the homeless are considered in that, or when I think about a park, a 60-acre park, knowing that that's in my neighborhood, but I know that the people I talk to on the street are in fear of jail being their outcome when that park is set up, because they'll be sleeping on a bench if nothing changes in their life, and they'll go to jail. Now, I'm going to show up because yes, the park will increase some people's quality of life, but I don't want my quality of life to be so good when there's someone else out there suffering and their quality of life is not good at all. So I'd be happy to give up my quality of life so that other person can have a better quality of life. That's a hand up. So when we come together to make plans like we're talking about today, we can have outcomes like healthier individuals, healthier families, and collectively healthier community. Let's strive to live well as healthier communities. I'm so excited that we can use our privileges to make that happen today. Thank y'all.
That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I can't think of a better way to just bring it home. Guys, thanks for hanging with us. I know for many of you, it's been a long day. I know it's been a long couple of weeks. As we've all said, there've been a lot of fights. There've been a lot of pulls on us, on our emotions, on our passions, on the ways that we want to get engaged. And as we reflect on those, I'm reminded of what Lawson said. You know, we each only have to carry our one grain of sand. I think that persistence and passion and perseverance really can help us get to where we want to go. And so just to remind you, we started out as a celebration of the Culture of Health Prize. And I remember so clearly Stacy Mills and Katie Smith having a conversation that I was privileged enough to listen in on. And we were talking about, you know, this is a celebration of a start, not a completion, not a finish. And we kind of consider this series the same way. This is a start. We're not done. Like, this is the end of the series and that's it. We're going to wrap a bow on it and pat ourselves on the back for a job well done. Now we're putting it out there that we recognize that change needs to happen through all of these personal stories, through all of these personal experiences that we've shared in tonight and in the other previous nights. There are things that need to change. They need to change locally. They need to change at the state level. They need to change at the national level, so that we can all get to a place where we're living our best lives. And I think we came away today with some great tools to put in our toolbox to help us move towards that. I want to just remind you that there are some places where we can jump in. Specifically, Live Well Greenville is looking to build a food equity advisory board. If you or people in your work come across individuals who have a passion for creating equity to healthy foods, please send them our way. We also know that the Greenville Homeless Alliance is creating an advocacy fellowship, again, for people who are passionate about helping people rise up out of circumstances that lead them towards homelessness. The Nonprofit Alliance has an advocacy committee for those of you who are engaged in nonprofit work and want to be part of the Voices That Change. Public Education Partners has a strong advocacy platform. There are so many places to plug in. And we as a group, those of us who've planned this event, this series of events, also want to try to put together some periodic meetings. We started out saying monthly, and then we were like, wait a minute, let's make sure like we can live up to our promises. But we want to be able to reach out to all of you. We want to be able to engage when something comes down the pipe that needs attention, and have that opportunity to mobilize when the timing is right. And so first and foremost, I'm going to ask you, if you feel engaged and motivated and inspired, think about a way that you can get involved in one of these opportunities and some of the other opportunities that have already been discussed today, like the NAACP or the League of Women Voters. Just get involved. It's great to show up on a Thursday night, and I super applaud any of you who are, who've stuck through with us tonight. But we have to do a little bit more. I have to do a little bit more. I need to pick up the phone, as Derrick said, and make sure that my elected officials know who I am and what I care about, even if I can't honestly say I voted for any of them. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that on the record. But we just don't want this to end here today. And so I definitely want to give a huge shout out to Jessica Sharp and Sharp Brain Consulting for helping lead us through the content development, helping us reach out to all of the partners that have been part of this. I want to give a shout out to our other planning partners with Piedmont Health Foundation, Jolly Foundation, Live Well Greenville, all of the many voices and folks that were there to help us win this Culture of Health Prize. And I want to thank all of you with a passion for Greenville and Greenvillians, and just wanting to make this a better place for all of us to live. I think we all have these privileges that have been brought up today, and we want to make sure that we don't waste them. And so with that in mind, I just want to say thank you again. I want to say thank you to all of the team that helped put this together, and you will hear from us soon. Look for a survey to tell us a little bit more about what you thought about these events and how you would like to be engaged in the future. Thanks, guys, and have a wonderful night.
And one quick note,
Yes.
The survey link is in the chat now. Our teammate Kate Lewis has put in the chat, so you can go ahead and click on that, and then you can leave the meeting and fill out the survey while it's fresh on your mind. But thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.